This is a podfic of The Bets You've Made by Solitary Bird, narrated by Solitary Bird. This fic is rated M for graphic descriptions of violence, abuse, human trafficking, and uncomfortable pants. Additional content warnings. Vague threat of sexual assault to a high school student that does not happen. It's raining. It does nothing to lower the temperature even at night. Kim is sweating. His stylist made him wear a pair of incredibly uncomfortable leather trousers to perform in. He can feel the sweat pooling in his socks, and the thought of how badly they are going to smell when he takes them off has him almost gagging. If Kinn hadn't all but forced him to be the go-between for a large money drop happening between the minor and major families, he would have had time to go get changed. He'd spent so much time and effort trying to separate himself from the family business, yet he was still at their beck and call. If he hadn't been stressed about making it to the arranged drop-off point all day, Kim wouldn't have forgotten to place spare trousers he could change into the storage compartment of his bike. He's soaked through by the warm rain pelting down on him from an angry sky filled with lightning. In a way, he's grateful for it. The rain is a good explanation of why he's visibly wet, and he doesn't have to think about how badly this outfit is affecting his sperm count. Bye-bye, future children. Bye-bye. The exchange of money is taking place in someone else's territory. An unusual choice, but given the rising tensions on both sides of the family over the past 3 months, it's probably a sensible one. Uncle Pakin and his family had long been allies of the Kinn crime syndicate. Grandfathers on both paternal sides had been good friends. The money was set to change hands on one of Uncle Pakin's illegal street bike race locations. As Kim wove his bike through the spaghetti of roads in the capital, fewer and fewer vehicles surrounded him until at last he was left alone. Kim sped through the night past buildings filled with light, counting the lampposts that passed by overhead for something to ease his annoyance. His legs were tired of gripping to the body of his bike. He'd always had the habit of holding it between his thighs in a vice-like grip, as if squeezing it so would make the bike any faster. Useful in pursuits when it was easy to be unseated, but less than ideal for long journeys. The moon was rising over the horizon, small and brilliantly white in colour, when Kim finally found the location. A winding section of motorway cordoned off for roadworks several miles in both directions. He left his bike in the capable hands of the attendants, giving them a brief flash of his seldom-worn family ring. No one would be dumb enough to turn away a Kun's son that had come on an official business. Kim hung his helmet on the handlebars of the bike, enjoying the soft breeze that was finally turning cooler now that the night was deepening. The paintwork of the front fender shone in the moonlight as he slipped the staff the keys. When he got back, there had better not be any scratches on it. It was Kim's favourite motorbike. It might not be as expensive nor as sleek-looking as the ones he was so famous for riding. Kim had seen various fan thirst trap edits, but it fit in with the other bikes around it seamlessly. More a dirt bike than a superbike. An expensive dirt bike, but a dirt bike nonetheless. Luckily someone had just rolled in on a bright yellow Ducati, and they were now drawing what few curious eyes had begun flitting his way. The fabric of his nondescript black face mask clung to Kim's face damply. Many of the people attending the race would be similarly disguised, so it would help him on 2 fronts. 1, to provide some protection against being recognised as Wick, and 2, to pass as staff to the more casual attendees. Unfortunately, it seemed he would have to suffer for a while longer. The guards at the entrance to the finish line viewing point didn't even need to see his family ring. They merely ushered him through. Someone must have notified them that he had arrived. Kim was glad not to have the hassle, but if they were his bodyguards, they'd be disciplined. This was a weak point in the security that could be easily compromised and quickly breached should anyone decide to do so. Luckily for them, Kim wasn't their boss and he had bigger fish to fry tonight. Hopefully Vegas wouldn't be here at the handoff. He wasn't taking the role of head of the minor family with any less suspicion of the rest of the family than he had when he was the heir. Being around him without Pete to act as a buffer was particularly uncomfortable. Kinn, you are here right on time. Kim looked around the crowd to see who had addressed him, finally locking eyes with the short and brightly dressed bike model, or race girl, She'd been rapidly chewing gum, but the stressed expression she'd been wearing was now melting away. Uncle Pakin said that you were attending the event. He asked me to take you to somewhere comfortable, she said. As soon as the words left her mouth, she started walking off into the crowd, and Kinn was forced to rush after her so as not to lose her. The impossibly high-heeled boots she was wearing looked uncomfortable, but then so did her entire outfit. It was made of some sort of thick, shiny silver faux leather that looked miserable to wear. A veritable sensory nightmare. Kinn heavily sympathised with her. Once the crowd thinned, he was able to walk at a more comfortable speed. As they passed rows of brightly coloured racing bikes, the mechanics' tent, and the space set up for the racers to rest in private. He could see Pete standing sandwiched between the two minor family bodyguards, one wrist handcuffed to a briefcase, but there was something that made Kinn stop dead in his tracks. There was a sound that set the hair on the back of his neck upright. There was something wrong happening. It wasn't loud enough for Kinn to confidently identify it, but high and panicked like an injured animal. Had someone run over a stray cat in the darkness? As much as he wanted to go help the poor animal, the money drop was time-sensitive. He could only hope that it was still alive when he picked up the briefcase, or maybe that its suffering wasn't long. There were only lorries this far away from the makeshift track, used to transport Uncle Pakin's personal bikes, his babies, the ones less than a handful of mechanics in Thailand were allowed to handle, bikes that even fewer racers ever had the opportunity to ride. Here the sound was louder, and a wave of uneasiness rolled over Kinn as they were about to pass the last of the parked lorries. Pete and the minor family guards were less than 800 metres away, but Kinn had long learned to listen to his gut, and it had served him more times than he could remember. Something is wrong. Don't walk past this trailer. The thought was so loud that Kinn was almost startled. Kinn looked over at his confused-looking guide. If something went wrong, there was no way she'd be able to run in those shoes. Not without getting 2 broken ankles at least. He gestured to her to stay still and that he would be back before slowly walking towards the sound. Long, thin fingers brushed against the chest holster containing his gun to reassure himself that it was still there. It was. It always was. His father might be permanently disabled after the failed coup, but that didn't mean that he wasn't still a threat. There was the sound again. It was muffled but familiar. Familiar enough for him to break away from the immediate task at hand, regardless of its importance. Pete would be considerably more understanding of his detour than Vegas would have been. Goosebumps surfaced on the flesh of his arms, despite the still, warm air. You could feel the heat leaching up off of the asphalt through the bottom of your shoes. With bare feet it would probably be so hot the skin of your soles would burn, almost too hot to think clearly. That must have been why he had nearly missed it. It sounded like wherever the noise was coming from, maybe the lorry. Now that Kinn was closer to it, it was clear that it wasn't an injured animal, but a person. No one should be out this far from the race. No one other than those participating in the handoff. He wasn't naive enough to think that they couldn't have been compromised. Amounts of money considerably smaller than this had corrupted people before. Smaller gangs were ever on the lookout for a chance to make a name for themselves, and wouldn't this be the perfect opportunity to make that name? Big money made people reckless. It had the small problem of attacking the odd person willing to take stupid chances, like trying to spring an ambush on the Tirapanya Kuns. If it really was an ambush lying in wait and Kinn wanted to be able to go home. Preferably without a bullet hole in his head so that he could have that bath that he'd been wanting for hours, or his cousin going nuclear because Pete was injured, and with the guards alive, he was going to have to do something, at least until the money had changed hands. He arrived in the corner of the lorry trailer faster than he wanted to. There were signs of tampering on the cab door, namely a bolt cutter hastily thrown on the ground, and the sad remains of an expensive-looking lock. What the lock had originally been used for, Kinn couldn't even start to guess. Pakin's men sometimes left tools on board in secured boxes. Stealing tools was maybe lucrative enough to face the wrath of Pakin and his men. He didn't know. The price of just the metal alone was probably worth it to someone desperate enough. It didn't take a lot of common sense to realise someone had broken in. The evidence was right in front of Kinn, but what for? Tools? There were so many other lorries here to break into for those. You could probably even wait for a lull in activity in the mechanic's tent down by the makeshift pit stop and chance swiping something good. No one kept their valuable stuff in an unguarded lorry curtain-sided trailer, and Pakin's bikes were all out for the race. They were either stupid or up to no good in a different, more creative way, which would at least be interesting. Something that required being this far away from the crowd couldn't be good. It was why the Kuns had chosen the spot themselves for the drop-off after all. He crouched to look underneath the trailer. If they were hiding, they weren't underneath it or standing on the other side. There were no feet visible, and Pete's men would see them, even in the low light. So they had to be in the trailer, because the sound had come and gone, but muffled sounds of people speaking had replaced it. It only took one sentence to figure out just what he was hearing. His gun is loaded, and in his hand within seconds. "Stay still," a voice shouted from inside of the lorry. It's muffled by the fabric PVC sides of the trailer, flexing in the slight breeze, but it's quickly followed by a much louder, "Do what you're told, or we'll make you," and something that sounds like choking. Kim checks once more. The gun is loaded, as he approaches where they've gained access to the vehicle by cutting through the fabric of the siding, and he's glad of the reassurance because now there's someone screaming. Someone is screaming, and Kim's going to need every bullet in that gun. Being the youngest member of a mafia family, Kim has heard a lot of screaming. His father has raised him to be the ultimate weapon, more of a machine than a man. There was a reason why under his father's reign, Kim had been the sole heir of his empire that was permitted to live outside of the palace walls. That scream had been one of absolute terror, and from someone young, possibly younger than Porchay. A small gust of wind lifted the loose remnants of the fabric covering the opening they'd made, and even though it was dark, the light of a torch held by someone gave him a glance at the interior. There were the feet of several people on the other side of the plastic, standing in the small pool of light. Approximately 4 people standing, in a lumpy shape that could possibly be 2 people kneeling. It was hard to tell. The unknown shape was almost entirely in shadow. Kim cursed them for not bringing more torches. How could they be so badly prepared? Unless it was purely opportunity that had brought them here. "Get your filthy hands off of him," someone screamed, voice high-pitched in terror. It sounded familiar, but Kim couldn't place it. He'd spoken to so many people at the fan signs he'd held during this tour that all their voices and faces had kind of melted together. Maybe it was one of his fans? He hoped not, for their sake and his own. Though this scenario was so unbelievable, it was likely if they did recognize him, his fans would never believe it. "The night my idol saved me at the underground street race." It definitely had Wattpad vibes for sure. "Oh, but Sky loves sharing with my friends. Don't you, Sky?" The voice was considerably calmer, almost oily in the obvious pleasure it was taking in the other's distress. There was definitely an undertone to it that made all the hairs on the back of Kim's neck stand on end. Those were not the words of a man talking about sharing a bag of sweets or lending a game to someone. Whether he knew them or not, there was 2 people, potentially kids, that were in serious trouble. Kim's mind flew through all the worst scenarios it could create. Not an ambush then, but an assault. Like hell was this happening? Especially not on his watch. The hole they'd cut to make the entry was large enough that Kim could just spring his way up and into the enclosed space, gun drawn, and extremely conscious of making sure his back was covered by something. Anything. Today was not the day to get shot in the back. His touring schedule had already been pushed back once because of a typhoon. Management would never forgive him for how much overtime they'd have to pay the PR department. Getting shot in the face might also make touring difficult, but he was confident that he could avoid that at least. It had been a split-second decision. Kim's body, though tired from work and exhausted by the heat, moved without him really thinking about it. At first his climbing up into the lorry had gone unnoticed, something that only worked to his advantage. Years of intensive martial arts training and dance lessons his older brothers had fought for him to have meant that Kim was almost silent on his feet when he wanted to be. A quick flick of his eye around the room left Kim in no doubt as to what the situation he'd just inserted himself into was. A really fucked up one. There were 6 people here, illuminated now in the stark overhead lighting used by the mechanics. They had clearly given up on doing whatever they were doing by torchlight, just as he had leaped. 4 were standing around 2, who were kneeling. All of them had their backs to Kim. Climbing rope was being used to restrain the 2 smaller figures. The binding was sloppy and excessive to the point of overkill. Almost comical, in fact. If Kim had been Vegas, he would have actually laughed at the state of the knots alone. They'd been tied by someone that plainly had no idea what they were doing, which was a good sign. They had to be petty criminals, kids from some small no-name gang that thought that they were hot shit, but were stupid enough to try something on Pakin's territory. Or rich kids that thought Mummy and Daddy could smooth over every misdemeanor. Ones that could never take a punch, but didn't have the wherewithal to not run their mouth. Either way, that would make this a lot easier. Those restrained by the terrible mess of tangled ropes were thin, and although Kim couldn't see their faces at this angle, judging from just their body shape, they were young. Too young to be allowed into the race grounds without a chaperone to ensure that they kept their mouths shut about the cool illegal race they saw, or doing something stupid like attempting to walk out onto the racetrack. That was a quick way to spend 6 months learning how to walk for a second time because you were so entranced by a handsome, pretty, attractive racer that they crashed into your stupid ass. The kid on the left screamed as one of the men licked a stripe up the side of his face and worked his fingers under the ripped shirt he was wearing. At least one of the men laughed, as the other person they had no doubt tricked to come here with tales of non-proprietary skill, or getting to ride on an expensive bike, tried to stop those fingers reaching any further beneath the protesting fabric of the other's shirt. Kim felt the familiar fog of rage fully take over him. He'd been trained to be a weapon, and at times like this he was grateful. It made everything he was about to do easier. The one with roving hands had a bullet in his head, and was only starting to fall before Kim was moving to neutralize the next target. One or maybe both the kids were screaming. Kim looped back to ensure that they were safe. Could hear hurried footsteps outside of the lorry. Attention had been drawn to them, hopefully only by minor family members who hadn't been standing that far away. They'd brought one of the kids here, wearing his high school uniform. Pakin's security needed replacing. How had they let in a kid in his school uniform? Had he been with these creeps at that time too? The thought made the hair on the back of Kim's neck stand up straighter than a poker. Kim stared at the two victims, doing his best to work his way towards them without also losing sight of the remaining targets. School uniform was visibly shaking, now curled up on the floor with the taller and slightly older one, all but laying on top of him to try and shelter him from the flying bullets as best as he could, while still tied up. Smart. Lying down would make them a smaller target in the gunfight that had erupted. Henchman number 3 came at Kim with a knife that looks like he's probably been taken out of his mother's kitchen. It's easy work for Kim to immobilize him because he telegraphs every move he's going to take several seconds before he does it. It's almost comical. Once Kim is in control of the knife, it's very helpful in cutting through the rope spaghetti surrounding the two. Although it's not particularly sharp, the serrated edge more than makes up for that. He had barely started untangling them when minor and major family guards were storming the lorry, capturing one of the wannabe gangsters who was trying to flee, and dragging the others out. Whether they were dead or unconscious was of little concern. Pete must have set off a distress beacon for this many guards from both sides to come barreling in through the side of the lorry. Kim lowered the gun in his hand, checking and double-checking the bullets remaining in the chamber before engaging the safety and returning it to his holster. The danger of being shot was now over. The kids still hadn't moved or said a thing, and Kim doesn't really know how to start this conversation. Usually when he takes part in situations like this, he just leaves once the shooting is over. His part has always been the tactical side of operations, the one getting their hands dirty. There were normally plenty enough people to clean up the mess he's left behind and comfort anyone that needs comforting. His discomfort must be showing heavily on his face, for when Pete locks eyes with him, he immediately takes up the comforting role for him, just steps into it so easily that you would think that he was a daycare worker and not a member of the mafia. That ability to switch so quickly and so seamlessly, flipping almost instantaneously, was what made him dangerous. Seeing it in action right here and now, Kim realised, maybe for the first time, just what had pulled his cousin into Pete's orbit. The briefcase full of money that Kim is supposed to be here picking up is still handcuffed to his wrist. Running here with it must have been uncomfortable. The chain connecting it to him clinks as he helps the frightened boys sit up again. Neither of them can stand on their own, legs unable to bear their weight shake uncontrollably, and they both hold themselves at unnatural angles, signs that they had been tied up much longer than Kim had expected. In the sudden silence that they all find themselves in, Kim turned to leave, bracing himself for the phone call he's going to have to make with Kinn to reassure him. One of his legs is already poking through the ruined expanse of PVC they're enclosed in, when a tired, scared-sounding voice called out, "P." They locked eyes, and the puffy tear-filled ones that met Kim's tired ones sent a jolt of horror and joy through his heart. It was Porchay. That was what had been so familiar about the sound. He'd lost a lot of weight that gave his face a series of unfamiliar sharp-angled edges. He dyed his hair yet another bold colour, and there was a set of painful-looking bruises around his throat, but it was still Porchay. Porchay, who he'd been trying to find for 5 months, at this point, with no success. It had been like Chay had simply never existed. No matter where Kim had looked or asked others to look, there had been next to nothing to find. Yet here he was. Pete was hugging the younger one, that Kim was sure he'd heard referred to as Sky by the guy who'd shot in the head. They gently rocked back and forth, with Pete gently stroking the kid's back, smoothing out his uniform and whispering something into his ear. The kid was stiff, almost as rigid as a statue, and unresponsive for quite some time before he broke. Tears poured from his eyes, wetting Pete's jacket, and he started shaking even more violently than before, to the point that Kim took 3 steps towards them, sure that he was having some sort of seizure, only to be waved away by Pete. Not a seizure, then. He thought that it was best then to leave him in Pete's care. His cousin's lover pulled out a surprisingly large wooden-handled knife from inside of his trousers. The leaf-shaped blade glinted in the air as he made quicker progress through the rope Sky was still entangled in than Kim had been with the shitty kitchen knife. It was a knife that Kim had seen many times, though usually it was in Vegas's hands. They really were a thing then. Of course he'd known they were sleeping together, everyone knew that by now, but Vegas giving him his favourite knife was definitely a statement as to the more permanent status of their relationship. "Non Chay, non Sky, P is just going to cut these off of you, okay? You must be so uncomfortable. It will all be over soon and P will take you somewhere safe." Pete's voice is determined, strong, and filled with unwavering conviction. Kim has no doubt Pete would burn the world down to make sure his words come true. The knife's sharply horned edge made its way quickly through the climbing rope tangled and densely knotted around Sky and Chay. Kim was just glad not to have to undo all the knots by hand. Porchay was crying. P, his voice was choked sounding around the tears, and he was rubbing his wrists that were red, raw from the rope. To Kim, he looked even more lost than the day they had parted, and he felt a stab of guilt in his gut. A part of Kim had expected Chay to ignore him, but there was still a part that was hoping Chay would fall into his arms, declaring that he had been wrong to run away, with such conviction to never meet again. He knew that he didn't deserve the latter, after what he had done to Porché's tender heart so coldly, but a freed Chay did neither. Instead, he scrambled to help Pete detangle the school kid he'd been tied up with from what remained of the rope. Said kid was still shaking, clothing torn from unwelcome, wandering hands. It made Kim want to throw. It made him furious that the attackers he had killed had died so quickly. It made him unable to do anything other than stand here watching them comfort each other. Getting the rope off of the kid proved to be a lot more complicated than cutting it off of Chay. The idiots had brought him here obviously had more time to tie the knots, and had done a better job. Kim fished around in the pockets of his jacket, trying to find anything that could help, eventually finding a pocket knife he'd always carried on him, and he cursed himself for forgetting about it in the heat of the moment. He was getting rusty, and rust got you killed. Pakin truly needed to hire better guards if he'd got in here with a blade, and these two. He needed better guards. Chay was nearest. Kim pressed the warm handle of the knife into Shay's hand, folding his fingers around it. He mimed sawing it back and forth a few times before the younger turned eagerly to help cut away the rope still twined around his friend. Kim might no longer be wanted, but he could be of some use. He could be of more use outside, though, dealing with the remaining members of this ragtag group, so he simply slipped back through the ruined side of the lorry and out into the darkness of the night. 2 bodyguards from the Minor family were standing on either side of the entrance, firmly at attention with hands visibly holding a firearm. Kim nodded to them, thankful at least that Pete and Vegas's men were better trained than his uncle's. "Don't let anyone in there but me or P. Vegas, not even P. Pakin," he ordered, If there was any resentment towards being ordered around by a member of the Major family, he couldn't see it on their faces. I have to go inform Porchay's brother that I've found him, but there's also a terrified high schooler in there, and I don't think any more big scary men need to be in there than absolutely necessary. Yes, Kim, both answered. This phone call is going to be awful, Kim thought, as he brought out his phone and saw the endless amount of missed phone calls and texts from his family, reassuring Tankun that he wasn't dead, would have to wait, and being chewed out by Kinn could be put off forever as far as he was concerned. Informing Porsche that Chay had been found could not. First he would make that call, and then he would find wherever the guards had dragged the remaining members of this shitty gang and take some of his frustration out on them. Then he would go chastise his uncle for his shitty security, and then he would apologise to Chay on bended knee if need be, take the money from Pete, and finally go home. Hopefully with Chay, maybe also get out of these horrific leather trousers before his dick fell off from lack of blood circulation. Possibly have nightmares about what could have happened. The end. Thank you for listening.